That's cool.
All right, let's see. Hold on here. Let me know if you pick up something on your end. Great. Somebody would call me. Let me see. Hold on. Is and John, do you see anything on your end? You might need to
You mean on the
refresh.
screen?
Yeah, the
You mean on
stream
the
the
screen?
stream looks like it sucks on my end.
Okay, let me, I'm gonna refresh it.
Y'all, man, I'm sorry about this. I'm in the hood right now, man. I'm in the hood. I'm already seeing people popping in, but why is who the fuck keeps calling me, man? They're calling me on all my goddamn phones. Fuck, man. Hey, whoever's calling me, man, I'm not answering the phone. You see, I'm live. They're calling me on my trap phone and my business phone.
Oh.
Oh, my God
Oh,
damn.
is that your cell phone, your personal cell phone ringing?
Yeah, I got a personal and I got a trap, man. And
Oh.
and they calling me on both phones right now. Hold on, who is this?
Okay, so I
Okay,
just refreshed the page, and it
it's my
says,
baby mom's.
all, it says all tickers, all topics.
Yeah,
No,
that's not even
that's not,
that's an old that's from an
yeah.
old show. I don't know why it's picking up that one. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm live right now. Let me stop embarrassing myself. I'm live right now, ladies and gentlemen. And again, if the internet is really bad, please forgive me. I've got Jonathan Bogan in the house right now. Can you guys press one if you could at least hear me and see me clearly? Because if I have to end the stream and then just do it with recording one with him, I'll do it because I don't want to sit here and embarrass myself in front of all you white people. All right. Okay. All right. Yeah, Leon, I got multiple phones, man. I got multiple phones. Okay. All right. Well, John, I guess they can hear us and see us clearly. I know I'm the only one who can be seen, but I do have you on the line. And again, I want to thank you for joining me, John. I hope they can hear you loud and clear. I hope they can hear you loud and clear. And again, y'all forgive me. I'm in the hood right now. I know I got that 10 megabyte, that 1 megabyte per second internet. Y'all know how to do it in the hood. Everybody in the building got to share one damn line. Uh, Let me see here. All right, but you guys know who this is. Is a good friend of mine, Jonathan Bogan. Of course, author of Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. He has an incredible YouTube page, which the link I will place in the description as well as in the comment section at the end of this video. This is kind of rushed, so we'll do all that. Don't worry. If you want to link up to him right now, you can search on Twitter. His handle is Libertarian Black Man. Is that right, John?
Yep, that's it. Libertarian black man.
Okay, Libertarian Black Man. Yes, that's his thing. Libertarian Black Man. You can look him up. I believe also uh, on your Twitter. They can also get to your YouTube too, right, John?
Yep, it's the same title, Libertarian Black Man. That's the name of the YouTube channel as well as the Twitter page.
Okay,
Libertarian Black Man.
that's what's up. That's what's up. Yeah. So y'all make sure you guys like my man's, uh, YouTube page as well as his Twitter and follow him. So John, the last time we spoke was almost 5 months ago. We did a show talking about how the market was going down, and literally a week later, the Federal Reserve instituted QE, or QE by another name, and now we're sitting here back at all-time highs. I mean, when we talked, things were falling apart, and sure enough, now we're back to all-time highs thanks to that QE by another name. Just slightly before that, we had another show. Gold was at 1,200. Now we're well above 1,500. We actually hit 1,600 this week on gold. I mean, John, a lot's going on right now. Commodities are responding to all the debt that's being printed right now. First, for the people who don't know you, give a quick summary of who you are, and let's get into the topics.
Yes, well, I am the author of Say No to Big Government, and that is a book that is trying to inspire people to see the government for what it really is, which is an organization that has really one purpose, but has gone far beyond that in the last activity. But unfortunately, over the last 100 years, the people have given the government the power to do so much more, to try to regulate the economy, to try to give people everything they want, whether it's a home, whether it is health care, whether it is education. The list is endless. And in every single one of these things, the government has degraded the ability of the people to prosper from those things, because in fact all of those different items get more expensive. We've seen the cost of college, we've seen the cost of health insurance, we've seen the cost of homes, and so many other things get more expensive over time because the government has gotten involved. Our ability to prosper has been severely impacted in a negative way, and that is because when we grow our government, we grow the amount of taxes we have to pay, we make taxes more complicated, we reduce our ability to live our lives, run our affairs the way that benefits us, the way that we see is good for other people, and we also destroy the value of the money, which pays for all that, because the government prints money, as you said, and then you get all kinds of distortions in the marketplace, a stock market that goes up no matter what happens, commodities that respond to the inflation by going up because people are using that money to buy. And the bottom line is, I want to inspire people with my book to see the government not as their friend, but as their enemy when it comes to going above and beyond its most basic functions. We need a government to take care of the most basic functions of law and order and security and maintaining a free marketplace where there's integrity in every transaction. But when the government is going above that to try to fix society, to try to make sure every human being makes a good decision with how they live their life, run their business, associate with other people, then we have created a situation where the government is now hurting people's ability to better their own lives economically and socially. And I want people to learn this so that when they vote, as we have an election coming up later this year, that they choose not to vote for the same people who maintain and grow our government. Instead, they should be voting for people who want to reduce the size of government, who want to eliminate the vast majority of taxes, regulations, and government spending, so that the people have an easier opportunity to take care of their affairs.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen. Shout out to Dawson Eats, all the people joining us in the chat room right now. Again, the person I'm speaking with is Jonathan Bogan, and he is an author, speaker, lecturer, all of that. And of course, author of Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. John, we almost got into a war just a couple days ago. what 72 hours can do. Now it seems to be, back on the back burner now. No one's talking about Iran as much as it was just 3 days ago. Can you explain what just happened with that? I mean, I going into the history, obviously we know that Iran has only been under sanctions when it hasn't been under control of any Western powers. Right? We already know about the dictator that they had, the Shah, and now the religious kind of system that they have now. But what can you explain for people what just happened there, and also why our government hates them so much?
Yeah, well, this is really 40 years in the making. Actually, you could say nearly 70 years in the making, because if you go back to when the Cold War began after World War II, America had this agenda to make sure that every country in the world was protected from communism. And long story short, Iran was a country that was going in a communist direction in the early 1950s because someone got elected who then started nationalizing Western businesses. We then decided, our country, to overthrow this person. His name is Mohammad Mossadegh, elected in the late 40s, early 50s, around that time period. And he was overthrown in 1953. And we put the Shah, in our guy, a dictator who was known as the Shah, over in Iran to run that country. And he ran that country with an iron hand for the next 20 to 30 years. The people rose up against him because he began to impose Western values, Western culture, a Western style economy that a lot of people didn't like. So they rose up, overthrew him, and that's when the theocracy came into power with the Ayatollah as the supreme leader. And our embassy was overrun, and basically that's when the U.S. became Iran's enemy, because they kicked the Americans out. They kicked out Western companies. In fact, the reason that Iran's Mohammad Mossadegh was overthrown was because he started to nationalize Western companies. A Western oil company that became British Petroleum. It went by a different name, but it was nationalized, meaning that the government took it over, and so we decided to overthrow him. And one thing led to another, and Iran ended up kicking out American influence. And ever since then, Iran has been on the opposite side of American globalist influence, trying to maintain groups that are anti-American, anti-Israel, anti-Western, and that continues to this day. Now, this war that was avoided was the result of our President Donald Trump killing what was a high-ranking government official who also doubled as a military leader, who was sending weapons and militias and conducting attacks on Americans during the war in Iraq that went on from 2003 to 2011. So he was killing American soldiers through his military activities because Iran is right next to Iraq, and he was able to coordinate various types of attacks on American soldiers who were occupying Iraq. Now, for exactly what reason Donald Trump did this assassination, we probably aren't going to know for a while, because multiple reasons have been given. No evidence has been provided that shows that there was some kind of imminent attack that this Iranian military leader was planning. The Trump administration said he had to kill him because there was an attack waiting in the wings. There's no evidence so far to show that. Mm. But this guy was killing American soldiers. Of course, if we had never invaded Iraq, if we never jumped into the Middle East in the first place, this guy would never have been a problem for us. So I put most of the blame on what happened in this last few days on the United States, because if we don't invade Iraq, if we don't have troops in the Middle East, this guy doesn't kill a single American. This guy does not become an enemy of the United States. And even Iran itself might be a Western-friendly country if, in fact, we had not interfered with their politics all those generations ago. But anyways, Trump kills their man, and then Iran launches missile attacks on American bases, and they don't actually kill any Americans. They just do some damage. So Donald Trump takes the event to say, hey, we got what we wanted. We killed Iran's highest-ranking military leader, and we're just going to take the missile attacks that occurred and say we declare victory and walk away. So as a result, Iran says, hey, we got back at the U.S., and all is well. They hit us, we hit them, game over. But it very well could have gotten worse than that. And it very well could still get worse in the future, because you never know what will happen as far as with our current president. He could do anything. As we've seen, he assassinated a military leader without any kind of regard for what his authority is. The Constitution does not allow a president to wage war. The Congress is supposed to do that. But the Congress has not actually declared a single war since World War II. So the last 70-plus years of foreign policy has been unconstitutional, and it's very sad that the president is able to get away with just shooting missiles at anyone, anywhere in the world. But I think we did dodge a bullet, although I think there might be more to come soon.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, because of that, we're still at all-time highs. In fact, just a day later, we actually went higher against that. John, there's so many things that we got to get to on this show. This show, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be about predictions for 2020, and this is going to be a show that we're going to be able to look back on and see how right we were, because as traders, that's kind of what we do, and that's how we're judged by how good and accurate our calls are. I think first and foremost, we can start on the economy. We just had a report come out today showing the lowest wage growth in well over 10 years for our country in this most recent jobs report. John, what are some predictions that you would like to make about the economy in 2020? Do we end the year with a market that's higher, or do we see finally companies show slowing growth and this stock market starts falling apart?
Well, we are in no man's land at this point. It is very hard to see exactly how this will go. I want to see the economy go into a recession, not because it's going to hurt anyone, but because it's going to eliminate debt, it's going to eliminate inflation, it's going to reset the economy for growth in the future. I have a feeling that might not happen. Now, it might happen, but the Federal Reserve and the federal government control the money supply, and they continue to print money and lend it out and create it out of thin air. And that is the reason why the stock market and the commodities markets, as well as the real estate market, is jumping up to record highs all over again. Because the Federal Reserve last year made a U-turn on interest rates. They decided, after several years of raising them, to stop raising them and to lower them again. And the last decade, we never saw interest rates hit even 3%. We never saw, at the same time, GDP growth in our economy hitting 3%. So the last decade was the first decade in American history that we did not have a recession, But at the same time, it was the slowest growing decade in history, because without a recession, we should have had years of 3% or more growth, and we never got that. So, and interest rates should have been able to go up to their normal level, which is somewhere between 5 and 7%. We never got that either. So we had a decade in which interest rates were kept very low, and it didn't stimulate the economy like it was predicted to. What it stimulated was the growth of debt, the growth of, in particular, government debt, mortgage debt, personal debt, household debt, pension debt. Every kind of debt pretty much grew. And that hangs over the economy today, which is one reason why I think a very bad recession could begin during this decade, because the debt bubble can burst, and anything could cause it to burst. Anything could cause it to burst. It could be some kind of natural disaster. It could be some kind of a political decision or political development. It could be a big bank in the world failing. It could be just some kind of a run on some kind of financial asset, whether it's a run on stocks or a run on some commercial banks or on a commodities market or the real estate market. Something could happen where this whole house of cards comes crashing down. But when and where and how it will happen, very hard to say, because there's a lot of manipulation out there.
Right.
And the Federal Reserve is in overdrive. As you were talking about QE, they are doing everything they can to make sure that banks have money to not only stay within their legal reserve requirements, but also to continue making loans for homes, for cars, for people going to college, for businesses. And at some point, inflation is going to kick in. And that could be the thing that bursts the debt bubble that we have. So very hard to say exactly how this is going to turn out, but my hope is that something happens this year. Certainly during this decade, something will happen. But I want it to happen sooner rather than later, because we need to stop growing all of this debt and all of this inflation in these different markets that we have.
Now, John, when it comes to growing this debt, these asset bubbles that are growing, one of the things that I always like to do is kind of bring it down to a personal level. And being both of us black in America, we understand that housing instability is one of the biggest problems that people like us deal with. Can you, for the people who are watching this and listening to this now and in the future, can you talk to them about how, this money printing is affecting their ability to either own a home or maintain a stable enough rent, and how is it affecting their housing situation? Because when we tell people that we pray for a recession, I pray for a depression in this country, because I understand how it's going to affect me. But how does this money printing affect those people? Speak to that for them.
Yeah. Money printing means that you are destroying the value of the money, because the more money that is in circulation, the less the value of each individual unit of money, which means that wherever the money that is being printed goes, you see prices rising in those markets. So, for example, with the real estate market, the reason why home prices continue to rise is because too many loans are being given to people to buy homes, and we are not, the home building market is not able to keep up with the demand. So as a result, home prices, when they rise, that means that you have to give a larger loan to someone, whereas in the past, maybe they're only going to borrow $50,000 for a house. Today they have to borrow $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000 to buy that same house. Keep in mind, it's the same house with the same amount of square footage. I have seen personally in my own situation, the value of my house has tripled over the last 40 years, even though we did not do anything material to add value to the house. In other words, we did not add a room. We did not add a floor. We did not actually expand the size of the house. And yet, it is worth 3 times more than it was 40 years ago when my family purchased it. That makes no sense unless you understand the reason is because of monetary policy, which is enabling people who really don't have the money to buy a house to buy a house. But they're indebted now because they are having to get mortgages that take longer to pay off. If you have money, you can make a bigger down payment on a house, and instead of getting a 30-year mortgage, you can get a 15-year mortgage or a 20-year or a 10-year mortgage and pay that debt off faster and ultimately pay less interest to that bank over time. But now people are getting 30 and 40, and I think we were talking even 50-year mortgages.
Yep, the 50-year
These
mortgage.
People, yeah, 50-year mortgages that people are going to be paying for the rest of their life in most cases. And the interest that they pay, we're talking triple, quadruple, quintuple the amount of money in interest than the money they borrowed from the bank. So you could be borrowing maybe $100,000 and pay back $400,000 or $500,000 back to the bank because you're paying a 50-year mortgage, and most of the money during the first half of the years of that mortgage is interest. So money printing and excess lending, it indebts people. It ultimately makes them indentured servants, because that's what an indentured servant is. It's somebody who pretty much has to work to pay off a debt. And that's what we've done with America. We created an entire society of indentured servants. We are all working to pay off debt. We cannot invest in ourselves like we used to anymore, because we have to pay back the lender who indebted us when we decided to take those loans, whether it's for a home, whether it's for a car, whether it's for an education, whether it's for starting a business that we could have used our own cash for in the past, but because we're short on cash, we have to take a loan. Now we are all working for the elites. The masses are working for the elites because they are the ones who have indebted them with these loans, and the money for these loans comes from the banks and the government creating it out of nothing.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, and John, when you say we work for the elites, again, I'm getting it down to a personal level. I know personally a couple young ladies are trying to live an independent life, right? I mean, you're outside your parents' home, you're trying to make a life for yourself. Well, guess what? If the cost of housing gets to $1,400-1,500 and you only make either minimum wage or just above that, you're homeless now, right? I mean, you're unable to become a productive or at least a homed American citizen, even though you have a full-time job. Can you tell us why wages are stagnant? Why hasn't all this money that you say is being created and pumped, that's getting people to buy bigger homes because they have to almost, why isn't that translating into the normal everyday working American having more money in their pocket? What's missing here?
Well, because this money that's being pumped into the economy is not being pumped in as cash. It's being pumped in as debt. So you might be working for a business and you have a full-time job and you're collecting a check, but that business might be paying you that check with debt. That business might, in fact, be barely able to stay alive, and they are simply borrowing money in large amounts because the interest rate is artificially low so that they can pay you. Once the business simply cannot afford to borrow, once the lender decides to raise the interest rate or to deny a loan, then that business can't pay you. And so you get laid off. And so, in other words, the reason why wages are not going up is because debt is going up and inflation is going up. People have to pay more now for their rent. See, real wages are the money that you earn after taxes and after inflation. That's your real wage. The nominal wage or the gross wage, that's what your check says when you get paid. But once you get your check, you have to pay taxes, you have to pay the higher cost of living. What's left over is your real wage. And the real wage is the amount of money that you're able to put in the bank after everybody's been paid.
Wow.
That is what has been, that's what has been stagnant. Because if your rent goes up, you've got less money in the bank because it went to the rent. If the cost of gas goes up, that's less money in the bank because you have to pay more for gas. If you've got debt that you have to pay and the interest rate goes up on that, you're paying more back to the lender. If you have a car note, and people are getting adjustable rate car notes, which is unbelievable, then you're paying more for that. So real wages go down. When inflation goes up, real wages go down. There are people who are not only seeing stagnation in their wages, they're actually seeing a decline in their real wages because they might be in an industry that is not receiving pay raises, that isn't generating a lot of growth. And yet their cost of living is going up. The cost of health insurance, the cost of car insurance, the cost of child care, the cost of food, the cost of just basic services that people pay. Things as simple as getting a haircut or getting, just paying for everyday groceries. These things have gotten more expensive. And if your nominal income does not grow with the inflation of those goods and services, your real wage goes down. Your nominal wage, which is the gross wage that you see when you get paid on your check stub, that can go up all at once. But if the cost of living goes up faster and higher than the amount of your check in terms of the dollars you earned, if that does not go up in line with the cost of goods and services you need to live, your real wage goes down, you find yourself saving less in the bank, and you're ultimately made poorer in that situation. So it's inflation, and the inflation is fueled by debt. It's too much money circulating. It's too many people spending a credit card, getting loans to buy things that they really should be paying cash for, that they really should be able to buy without financing. And that's all the product of our monetary system. And until that changes, real wages will continue to be flat or they will continue to drop because inflation has a direct inverse effect on someone's wages.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, we're talking to Jonathan Bogan, author, lecturer of Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. It's your boy Sal in the building, and somebody's asking me what program is this. Okay. Check out the videos on the channel, my man. So, John, not everybody can just learn to code. Right? I mean, because, that's the big slogan, especially these last half decade from 2015 on. When anybody gets fired, That's been like the ring, right? The learn to code or become a programmer or something like that. Not everybody can just translate into that. I mean, you got people who are in their 50s, 60s looking for employment, and they're telling them to learn to code. Uh, what what is what can America do for somebody who is in a field that's dying, has lost their job or is going to lose their job, or is in a situation we just discussed where their real wages are decreasing? Uh, if you can't go and learn to code, what can that person do?
Well, there are more than one. There's multiple markets, multiple industries in the economy that are growing, as well as those who are declining also. If you want to go into information technology in some respect, that's why coding is being promoted. But there are many other fields that are growing. Transportation is one of them. There's other fields, anything related to the science, technology, engineering, and math, and that's where coding comes in. But there are also, it's different in each state. States, for example, that have a lot of energy resources are states where there's going to be more demand for jobs when energy prices rise, or when there's a shortage of energy resources. But I would say anyone who's in a dying industry has to look at what industries are growing, and they want to stay. If they want to stay local, hopefully they're in a good spot where they're able to get a job in a different industry locally. But people are moving around the country more now than ever before, because not just the transportation technology has improved, but economies are now very, very much different depending on what state you live in. And sometimes you do have to leave the area that you're in. You might not want to go into a specific industry, such as information technology, where coding is important, but that might require you to have to go to another part of the state, maybe another part of the country, if you want to say you want to excel in maybe culinary arts, or if you want to excel in something that is more to your liking. I think there's always an opportunity to have a stable income, a stable job, but it's a matter of figuring out what you want to do and the locations where you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So people do need to broaden out what kind of options they want to take as far as where they want to live and what they want to do with their life.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, if you got a question for my guest, please put it in the chat room. More than happy to share that with him. So, John, going back to some predictions for 2020, one of the things that I want to look at as we go into an election year, I'm looking at what this administration has accomplished economically. It has been, I would say, quite impressive. Obviously, we know what levers they were been using to stimulate the economy. There's a lot of things that he can boast about. But if there's one thing that you would say is his weakness concerning the economy outside of the rising cost of living, do you have a fault that you can pick out and say the Trump administration didn't do a good job of this and that could possibly hurt them this year?
Yeah, absolutely. The tax bill that was passed a couple years ago certainly was lacking in a lot of things. I support cutting taxes, which is what happened. But The corporate tax cuts were different from the individual tax cuts. The corporate tax cuts were tax cuts nearly 50%, and they were permanent. The individual tax cuts were tax cuts of some single-digit percentage, 5, 6, 7% or so, maybe 3%, and or less. And those are temporary. Those tax cuts will expire in 5 years. So we gave a lot of people this false reality that their taxes are actually going to remain low. That's one thing that they didn't do right. What they should have done is had a policy of giving equal tax cuts across the board. If you're going to cut the corporate tax rate by nearly half, cut individual tax rates by nearly half. If you're going to make the corporate tax cuts permanent, make the individual tax cuts permanent. That's what I would have done. But the Republicans are concerned about the deficit, and that's another thing that's going to hurt Trump. Government spending has continued to grow. He has added trillions of dollars to the national debt since coming into office 3 years ago. He had $20 trillion of debt. Now he's got $23 trillion in 3 years, a rate of $1 trillion a year in government debt. And that all sits over the economy. So that will hopefully become an issue that people can use to say Donald Trump has not actually improved the economic situation of our country. Also, his economic growth rate has been very pathetic, not hitting 3%. People are saying that this is such a great economy because the unemployment rate is down to 3.5% and saying that there are jobs everywhere. But the truth is, our economy was so much better back in the 90s, 80s, and before then. His economic growth rate is no better than Obama's, if you look at the raw numbers. And the unemployment rate being at 3.5%, it will not stay there when you have a recession. And a recession will be the biggest thing that will become a negative. But that hasn't happened yet. But the tax cut bill has already happened. The $3 trillion of new debt has already been added to the economy. Inflation of home prices, inflation of the cost of education, inflation of health insurance, all of those things can be pointed out as negatives under the Trump administration because it's all the result of bad monetary policy, which he has done nothing about. He could put us on a gold standard. Donald Trump could put us on a gold standard, just like President Nixon took us off the gold standard. Well, President Trump could put us right back on a gold standard, and that would cause a depression. But it would also restore the value of our money and restore the ability of our economy to grow. He hasn't even entertained that idea. So there are so many different areas that you could point out. You could look at markets in which people are simply unable to afford the cost of living. You could look at the fact that homelessness is actually rising in so many areas, California and New York being the very worst because of home prices. Much of that has to do with the politics within the state, but the monetary system always is a factor. So the president has done some good things, but has also done some bad things, driving up the national debt, bad monetary policy, and a tax cut bill that did not hand the benefits evenly across the board to all Americans.
Yeah, I mean, we can spend a whole hour talking about the homelessness that's going on out there in California. I mean, it's almost sad to see, John. And I mean, it's just, just for blocks, you just see people who are putting up tents on the corner and under highways. And I mean, it's just really sad to see what's coming out of the West Coast in terms of homelessness. People literally being priced out of homes that they've lived in all their life and now have no choice but to live on the streets if they can't afford to come out this way and live out in the middle of nowhere. Not to get back into housing, but it's literally forcing so many people to find these communities in the middle of nowhere that are just dirt cheap, right? And just hey, I can at least be able to rent out here, and creating new cities that had been dying for years. Um, where do I want to take this? Uh, I want to touch on
Well, yeah,
gold.
you're right.
Yeah, go ahead,
And you
John.
have
You have something
people.
to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, you have it is so terrible. In California has the worst homeless crisis in the country. They're setting up tents uh, in the middle of nowhere, and oftentimes within cities. Cities, in some cases, you look at the LA County, they've actually designated certain areas for homeless people to set up tents to live. And they have actually hired people to clean up human waste
Wow.
that is now on the streets because, well, there's just not any working flush toilets. And where do you go? I mean, there's actually been a comeback of certain types of diseases in that area because of the how filthy it is. And really, home policy out in California is so draconian. They have so many environmental regulations. They have so many taxes. They have so many land use regulations that make it impossible to build enough homes for people. And so it can take years to build a single building, whereas if just a few hundred or thousand miles to the east of California and Texas, you can build in a few months what takes many years in California to build. So as a result, home prices and rent and mortgages get more expensive. You get people with full-time jobs who are homeless. They have full-time jobs, but they're living in an RV, they're living in a car, they're living in a truck because that is all they can afford because they're being charged $2,000-$3,000 a month just for a one-bedroom apartment. And people just simply cannot afford it. And they don't want to live among other homeless people because that's a health hazard. Because there is a comeback of certain types that have typhus outbreaks out there. It's unbelievable. But the reason is because, see, California is so strict on building homes. And that reduces the supply of homes. So when people want to buy homes, there are so few of them on the market that the price is through the roof. Rents keep going up. They have rent control. They have statewide rent control. That's one of the worst things about home policy. Statewide rent control, which does not allow landlords to raise rent prices. But as a result, very few people want to rent in California because you'll lose money because the cost of renting will go up, but you can't charge high enough rent to keep up with your rising cost of renting. So as a result, few people rent, and then you have a shortage of places to rent. And the rent continues to stay high. You have slumlords. They let the property fall apart. They can't afford to maintain it. So it's a terrible place out there in many of these communities, and that's why California is seeing hundreds of thousands of people leave.
Right.
They just cannot afford it, and it's the entire West Coast. It's Oregon, it's Washington, and it's also on the East Coast in New York and in Connecticut, New Jersey. They've got a terrible problem with homelessness as well. Those are the most heavily regulated parts of the country when it comes to housing, and they are paying a heavy price for it.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy because And that's why they're moving into all of these southern states. We're seeing people, particularly here in North Carolina, we're seeing a lot of people from New York. We're seeing people from all these New Jersey, all of these northern states who are running away from these higher prices up there. And John, this is the first. This is going to be the first decade where we're going to see baby boomers, for lack of a better word, start dying. Right? I mean, these are the richest groups of Americans right now. They are moving now into their early 70s. In the workforce, you see them there. They're hanging on to their job. I mean, they're one of the most. They drive me crazy in the workforce because it's like they're the ones who are really kind of slowing our generation from being able to like actually get into those higher paying jobs, because they're the ones who are creating a lot of the policy that slows everything down for us. But this is the first decade where they're actually going to drop dead. I mean, for lack of a better word. How is it going to affect housing? How is it going to affect spending in this country when we start to see the decline of the baby boomers? Because when I'm looking at properties where it's cold, right? I mean, I'm thinking, John, there's going to be a massive, massive, massive decline in housing prices in those parts of the country where it's cold, where old people who have decided that they're going to buckle down and leave because they're older now and they want to be somewhere nice and warm. I mean, how is it going to affect this country?
Well, that would be very good for people who want to buy homes. If you have people who are vacating their homes or they're selling their homes because they want to live somewhere else, that will put more homes on the market for sale. And you're right in saying that you'll see a decline in home prices as more homes flood the market. That is good for people who try to buy homes. But here's the negative side. It's that it will lead, I believe, to the Federal Reserve wanting to intervene. Because when home prices fall, this is what happened back in the late 2000s, you have an economic crisis because so many people were invested in home prices rising, and they're still invested in home prices rising. So if home prices begin to dip, the Federal Reserve will come in with more QE and in an attempt to pump the prices back up. And I think you recently shared with me something about the former Federal Reserve Chairman, Ben Bernanke, who says that we should not take negative interest rates off the table.
Yeah.
Ben Bernanke is the one who introduced America to QE, who introduced America to 0% interest rates.
He's one of the worst things that ever happened in this country. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Absolutely, 100%. One of the worst things that we've ever seen. And the reason was because of an economic collapse that began with a housing collapse. So if we see another housing collapse, that could then turn into another economic collapse. It's already happened before. And with a Federal Reserve Chairman who is open to the idea of negative interest rates, all we need is some kind of a recession caused by a collapse of one market. It could be the housing market, it could be the stock market, it could be any market. But if it is the housing market, as a result of baby boomers vacating their homes, then we could see for the first time in history negative interest rates. If you thought 0% was bad, and it was, wait until you see what happens when we have negative interest rates, which flips, it totally flips the idea of money and lending and saving on its head. Because with negative interest rates, people will literally get paid to borrow money, to borrow and spend, and they will be penalized. They will actually lose money when they save it. So think of the incentives there. If you're going to pay a price for saving money, you simply won't save.
Mm-hmm.
If you are going to be rewarded for going into debt, you will simply go into higher and higher amounts of debt. And ultimately, that turns into inflation because people will simply borrow more, the demand for money will go up, and you can have the economy spiral out of control with negative interest rates. And we have a former Fed chairman saying, yeah, let's consider that. Let's put negative interest rates on the table just in case we have a recession. I've never seen so much fear of the next recession happening ever in my entire time, in all the years that I've been looking at economics. I have never seen so many bankers and government officials so afraid of the next recession happening because they know it will be so bad that it will truly shake the world down to its core because there's so much debt out there. Hundreds of trillions if you look at the world debt total. Hundreds of trillions of dollars of debt. Worse than 2008. Worse than even 1929 when that began the Great Depression. So a housing collapse would be good for home buyers. They'll pay less for the home. They can get a smaller loan. They can put less down in terms of total money. But I think it would also inspire these bankers and these political authorities to jump in and try to prop the market back up again with inflation.
Man, that'd be so sad. I mean, because that's the last thing we need here in America. I think I also, we talked about this gentleman, Mr. Porn on my computer. I forgot his name, Paul Krugman. I retweeted one of your sentiments about him, how he's talking about it's all right for us to just print money indefinitely because Japan is doing great. Even though Japan has one of the most intelligent, populations in the world, that's kind of why they can get away with that because a lot of them are doing very high quality work for a living. But not to get off topic here. So you see the end of the baby boomers actually being the beginning of more stimulus. That is just, oh man, that's hard to think about. That's really hard to think about because I see that as a potential opportunity for my generation to finally gain some wealth, right? To finally become American in America. But you're saying that this is a generation that won't let it go. I mean, they'll literally die with QE.
Well, I think that because these very powerful financial authorities have such a grip on the economy, and we have a public that doesn't seem to care much, we could abolish the Federal Reserve if we simply vote for people to do so. We could abolish these people. We could abolish these institutions if we just took elections seriously enough.
Oh, John, I don't even want to go down that road because I mean, American people. First of all, most of them can't even tell you who's head of the Senate right now, let alone that they can abolish the Federal Reserve. I mean, our public education system. Yeah, our public education is a joke. I mean, I was looking at the statistics coming out of Detroit the other day. Me and you know Detroit public schools very well. 4th grade reading level, John. 4th grade reading level is what the average 11th grader is reading on in Detroit right now. What kind of life do you have when you are graduating from high school with a 4th or 5th grade reading level? I mean, it's you are being set up to fail. I mean, you're being set up to fail.
You're being stuck at working at the lowest rung of the economy in the fast food sector or in the retail sector. And these, speaking of industries that are starting to die out, I mean, these are the jobs that you don't want to have long term because they're being automated out of existence. They are being turned into positions where they need less human labor. We've seen what's happened with the retail sector. I mean, they're closing stores left and right. They're building kiosks so that you don't need to have a human being talk to you. And this is for the people who don't have the education to get a higher level, a higher, more stable job. Yeah, I mean, you know, when you put it like that, as far as how degraded our education is, it is very sad and pathetic. And unfortunately, you just can't count on people at this point to make the right political decisions. If you look at, you were talking about Japan, well, their education surpasses us by far in so many different areas, and this is why Japan actually has a pretty stagnant economy, but they don't have inflation, even though they have a lot of quantitative easing over there. They have negative interest rates, and yet the economy is so productive that they're not experiencing a lot of inflation. That's because the Japanese have a different type of culture and system when it comes to education. They simply are way ahead of us in the science and technology, engineering and math areas, and they work a ton of hours. I think they work more hours than anyone in the world.
And then we're in the world. They were just like 65, 75 hours a week. It's ridiculous. Americans, the average American is not going to go that hard for their company. I wouldn't want them to go that hard for their company with the kind of results they're getting now.
Yeah, and see, and actually, it's taking a toll on a lot of the health of these people. Some people are committing suicide because they are just literally working themselves to death. But
Yeah.
you know, their economy is actually very much one of the most productive in the world. Even though they aren't growing very much, they would be in a depression if, in fact, they were far less productive as a result of their monetary policy. But this country we simply cannot keep up. And we can't keep up. We don't have that kind of, unfortunately, we don't have that kind of interest nationally in trying to learn more about our system and trying to excel at being more productive as a country. We want to manipulate things. We want to have something for nothing. And unfortunately, we're going to pay for it. We're going to pay for it, and we are paying for it, and it's just going to get worse over time.
Yeah. Oh, man. Speaking of suicides, Japan has one of the highest suicide rates in all the world. In fact, they have an entire forest where people just walk in and commit suicide. It's like a suicide forest. There have been quite a number of movies done on that. Japan is like you said, they have different cultural norms there. I mean, if you don't become a doctor or a lawyer or some kind of high-end achieving, you go to that forest and just go kill yourself. I mean, if you don't score high on a test, you kill yourself. If you don't, I mean, it's we don't want to end up like that. That's the last thing we want to end up being. John, last time we spoke, I mentioned this earlier in the show, gold was at $1,200. Now it's at $1,500. We actually hit $1,600 this week. I'm going to go out on a limb and predict that gold could possibly be another $300 to $400 more this time next year, probably even another $1,000 more with the kind of debt that we're printing. They've said that they're going to stop the overnight QE or overnight lending in April. Do you believe that the Federal Reserve will stop that overnight lending QE by another name in April, or do you believe that another excuse will be made to extend QE even further into the year?
Oh, absolutely. You just said it right there. They actually said back in September, this whole QE began in September. And they said, well, it was just going to be for the month. And then it rolled into October, and then it rolled into November and December. And here we are in January, and they're still doing it. So they really can't stop. The only way that they can stop is if they allow for a recession to take place. They are propping the economy up more now than they ever have before. And they have one of two options. Either to just say, we're going to do QE forever, and then inflation will jump up, and that will turn into hyperinflation if it gets out of control, and that very well could happen. Or they can say, yeah, we're going to stop in April, and if the economy goes into a recession, then so be it. I have a very hard time believing they're going to take that latter option because they have invested so much effort, time, and money into preventing a recession. Ever since the last recession of 2007, 8, and 9, they have been going nearly full speed at making sure banks have money and making sure that unemployment stays low, making sure that banks are able to lend with money that came from nothing. It would be such a dramatic reversal of policy for them to stop that it could happen, but if it were to happen, the recession would very well begin. And unless we get a new Fed chairman and a new board of governors inside that Federal Open Market Committee, we're not going to see any major change in policy because they're all invested in just keeping the debt rolling. And that's what it is. They're not handing out cash to anyone. All they're doing is making loans available that indebt the entire country for generations into the future, and that create inflation in markets that prevent people from having enough money to buy into those markets, whether it's real estate, whether it's the stock market, whether it's gold, silver, or cryptocurrencies, or the bond market. People are being locked out of these markets because the inflation is way above their income to jump into those markets.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, like somebody said in the chat room, buy the dip in gold. Absolutely, I think I don't care what gold drops at. If you buy it now, you're going to be a very happy customer down the road, particularly if you're buying it for the long term. I think there's no other place to put your money as the dollar continues to lose value. It's been one of the best investments over the decade, going back to 10. You can go back to 2010, you can go back to 2000, you can go back to 1990. There's been one of the, there's no better place really to put your money than gold. John, outside of that, do you have any tips on where people could place their money outside of commodities, gold and silver? I mean, is there anything else that you can say maybe we aren't looking at that we should pay attention to? I know you've been somewhat fond of the cryptocurrencies. Do you have any other ideas of where investors should put their money to play this continued loss in value in the dollar?
Yeah, I think that diversification is going to be your best friend because there is simply no asset, whether it's a stock or a bond or a currency or a commodity or real estate-based investment, that you can trust 100%. In fact, I wouldn't trust any asset with I wouldn't trust it even with 50% of my money. I would diversify as much as possible. I would put money in cash, for example, have some savings, and by the way, don't have all of those savings in the bank. I wouldn't trust a bank with all of my money, because banks are insolvent by design. Any one of them can fail. All we need is for there to be a change in monetary policy, or for a bank to be in a situation where it simply cannot pay the depositors when they cash out, and it will go bust. So I would say have some cash in the bank, because you may have a debit card that you want to use or a credit card. Have money out of the bank, just so that if the bank does fail, you're not completely broke. I would say invest in real estate, but that's out of reach for so many people because of how high prices have gotten there.
Right.
And as far as the stock market, we obviously know that stocks have gotten more expensive, but there are also stock prices are all over the board. You've got the high and the medium and the low. And unfortunately, most people simply don't have the money to pay $2,000 a share for, say, Apple stock or Amazon stock. But then you can buy lower priced stocks that have potential for great growth as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen stocks that went from being penny stocks to stocks that were priced in the $50, $60 range,
right.
Which that's a windfall for your money. If you're a penny stock and now you're dozens of dollars a share, that's a windfall. And we're talking companies that are performing good services for people and are managing their affairs in the most profitable way. I mean, you can jump into a lot of different markets, but my advice, don't put 50% or more of your money into any one thing, because you don't want to lose it when it goes bust. And at this point, everything is so manipulated and volatile and unstable that anything could crash. The stock market could crash. The real estate market could crash. But we saw Bitcoin a couple years ago had this fabulous rally, and it just increased by exponentially during 2017. But then in the very next year, it crashed 80%.
Right.
So that's an example of a cryptocurrency that for many years was growing at a snail's pace. Mm-hmm. And then it goes to the moon in a few months, and then it falls to earth a few months later. It's a volatile world out there. So I would never suggest putting more than 50% of your money into any single thing. Spread it out. Have it in many different places. That way you can protect yourself from any single event causing a single market to drop.
Yeah, and the thing about it that, though, John, is, diversification is almost a rich man's game. I mean, just to have your money in these different things requires you to have enough money for it to make sense, right? Someone mentioned, if you're in these trades like gold or these ETFs that are proposing that you'd be on, the bearish side of the market. So if the market collapses, you make a lot of money. What's the chances that you're actually going to get paid? I mean, last I checked, though, if you go back to the 1920s or even in the 1875 crashes, the people who did bet against it, they did get paid, right? I mean, in fact, there was a popular book about that. I forgot this gentleman's name, How I Made $2 Million in the Stock Market. Guy ended up blowing his brains out. But I know somebody here knows exactly who I'm talking about. But he bet against the 1920 crash and got paid. So do you believe that there are chances that people who are betting against this reset or betting for this recession to occur, will they get paid? Because I mean, we had, what was this, the big bet or something like that, where these guys bet against the housing crash or the housing boom. They ended up getting paid multiple hundred millions of dollars. Uh, so is there a chance that people won't get paid, John, if they're on the winning side of that trade?
Well, that's the thing. I'm glad you brought that up, and that was in that movie, The Big Short.
Big Short. There we go.
That was the movie about that, about those guys, and quite a few people were doing that, and the reason they got paid was because the government actually bailed out the banks, bailed out these companies. That's the reason they got paid, because, see, those people who were betting that the housing market would crash, once the housing market crashed, the banks and the insurance companies and all the corporations who made these deals with them, they had to pay up, and they couldn't, because it was just too much money that they owed. Remember AIG? AIG, the American International Group, the insurance company. AIG was a monster of a company, so much so that the government said, we cannot let AIG fail, because they had, in a few days, weeks earlier, they let Lehman Brothers fail, which was also a investment bank. And when Lehman Brothers was allowed to fail, the government didn't bail them out. That's when you see the financial crisis enter a very dangerous phase. That's when you start to see the credit markets seize up, because everybody's worried that that institutions are not going to pay them. As a result, no loans go out. But the reason why these guys, like in the movie The Big Short, they got paid was because the government is bailing everybody out. And the money that these institutions that were going to fail, the money that they got, they had to pay off those investors. So AIG made a whole lot of derivatives contracts with people. And when AIG couldn't pay, they told the government, we're about to go bankrupt and we're going to take the whole economy down with us. That's when the government comes in. That's when the politicians said, okay, here's $80 billion, without strings attached. We'll give you 100 cents on the dollar. And that is how people got paid. They got paid because the government bailed them out, and the Federal Reserve bailed them out. So you're asking, well, will that happen again? I'm very confident that when the next recession happens, and it is more severe than the last one, that government and Federal Reserve aren't going to just stand by and let Armageddon take place. They will rush in with more bailouts, and the people who get paid are the people who invested in the recession happening, or who invested in a particular institution failing. So if they don't get paid, then you'll have a really bad recession. But if they do get paid, well, then you'll have a lot of bad inflation, as we saw after the financial crisis. Gas prices in a few years actually went right back to almost where they were before the crisis hit. That was part of the inflation that hit. That's why gold ended up going to its all-time high of $1,900 an ounce in 2011.
Right.
Gas prices went back to near $4 a gallon in 2011. That was the inflation that hit after all those bailouts. And it happened only about 2-3 years later. And But again, that is the situation that looms over us today. So will people get paid? Yes, if in fact there are bailouts, which I believe there will be, the people who are invested will get paid when the government and the Federal Reserve decide to bail out those institutions that they have deemed too big to fail.
And John, not to keep you too long, but I want to talk really quickly about automation. Automation is expected to go into auto drive this decade. It was just a mere whisper at the beginning of 2020. It started becoming a conversation in 2015. Now we're already starting to see it rolled out just somewhat slowly now with just, little vacuums running around people's homes. But by the end of this decade, it's supposed to be a real part of our lives. There are many articles out there that are saying automation could relieve women of almost 35 million jobs in the Western world, at least. What effect can you imagine that automation could have on women? And would it actually improve their lives, or would it actually destroy, the family as we know it in America? Because you've had now multiple generations of women who feel that it's their job to go out and make money, right? Now, we know that most women are pursuing jobs or in jobs that can be automated, right? Customer service, phone type of answering jobs, a lot of paperwork jobs in offices. What happens to the family? What happens to women? What happens to our society when you have that many women who can't find work?
Well, there's automation is it's all about productivity. You automate to help make labor more productive. And it's not the automation that is the issue, because automation is something that naturally grows in a marketplace where you're trying to produce the same goods for less cost. But the problem facing women and anyone in the market is being pushed out of a job and then not being able to land another one that is of the same equivalent. So if you have people losing their jobs and then getting hired to jobs that pay less, that's a problem. Automation is good because it's all about increasing productivity. It's about getting a machine to do what a human being can't do. A lot of Amazon's workers are having to deal with this because working conditions can be very harsh inside of an Amazon warehouse.
Right.
Because people they're being clocked, they're being timed, they're being watched, and they have to process so many pieces of merchandise per hour, or they'll lose their job. This has made the news where Amazon workers have been fired because they can't keep up. They have to move at a certain speed.
Yeah, they're out here peeing in cups and all of that stuff. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. No, you're exactly right. That's what they're doing. They can't take a bathroom break because it counts against their time.
Jeez.
And their job is on the line. So, yeah, they'll have, makeshift toilets and buckets and whatever right there on site because they just can't afford to leave that location for the day. And they'll work, 12 hours or 10 hours in a day. But then the machines come in because Amazon is investing heavily in machines so that people don't have to do that kind of work. Because let's face it, a machine doesn't have to take a bathroom break. A machine is going to work until the power runs out or until it breaks or until something wears out after hundreds of thousands of times. And it's constant. So automation is really helpful for productivity, and it does eliminate jobs, but it eliminates jobs that were less productive. So the challenge is to go from one productive job to another. Not that one job is being eliminated, but that one job is being eliminated without another job to go to. That's the challenge. And in fact, there are jobs everywhere. We have an economy that has over 7 million open positions that are not being filled. And there's two reasons for that. One reason is because many of those jobs are not paying as well as jobs that were lost. They're part-time, they're seasonal, they're temporary positions. They're counting people who work for Lyft, or who drive Uber, who drive Lyft as a job, and these are not the kind of positions that are stable, solid incomes. I mean, they're side hustles, they're gigs. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are rejecting those jobs because they just cannot pay the bills. And they're collecting unemployment insurance and other government assistance, which competes with that kind of income from those other jobs. That's one reason people are not filling these 7 million jobs. The other reason is that a lot of those jobs that are open require skills, they require training, they require education, licensing, certifications that cost money, that cost time, that people simply don't have.
Right.
They're good-paying jobs that pay $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, but you can't just jump into them. You can't just, we were talking earlier about how bad the education is for so many Americans. Well, if you don't have a high school diploma, or maybe you do, but you don't have any college education, many of these jobs they just can't consider you for, because you have to have something. You got to have an associate, a bachelor's, a master's. You have to have some experience, some kind of permit that the government forces you to get, which they shouldn't, but they do. That can cost money and time and training. And as a result, because people don't have that, they can't get those jobs. So unfortunately, the problem facing women, men, and anyone in the economy when it comes to automation is not being automated out of a job. It's being automated out of a job without a equivalent job with an equivalent income to go to soon afterwards.
So, because I'm trying to get at what could happen, right? Now that, okay, you're right. They're not going to have an equivalent job after that. Because we talked about the fact that, again, they're low-skilled, poor education. I mean, do these people just end up homeless, John? I mean, when you have 5 million fast food workers who are now out of a job because you can go to McDonald's and put it on the board, and, this time, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, maybe a machine is making your hamburger. Maybe these things are completely automated, right? I mean, you don't even see a person there besides maybe somewhere to clean the area. What do those people end up doing? I mean, what do they do for a living?
Well, you're going to have a lot of different outcomes. Some of those people are going to end up homeless. Some of those people are going to find a job that is the equivalent, but it's not better than what they lost. Other people will find jobs that are worse than what they lost, but it's some kind of employment. Other people will receive some kind of education. They will go to school, they will get some kind of training, or they will simply move out of the area that they're living in to a place where there's a lot of jobs being created that don't necessarily require as much money and time and training. And there are a lot of different outcomes. because you have everybody's different. Everybody has different desires and different ideas of what they want to do. So I think you'll see people going in all directions. When they lose their job, people are going to go in the place that they think best suits them at that time. And that's why you'll have a diversity of outcomes. But unfortunately, it isn't, the way it is today is not like it was in the past. In the past, people didn't need hardly any education for a good paying job because
Right.
we just had that. We had such a robust industry that they would just hire you because they needed you. And you would just be able to walk in and you had a good paying job. Now, the type of industries that are growing are the type that require some level of extra schooling. It costs money, it costs time, and the more money and time it costs, the fewer people who can get it, the fewer people who will be able to expend that effort and those resources. And so as a result, you have a glut of jobs on the market that are going unfilled, that people need filled. We need auto mechanics, but a lot of people don't want to do that type of work. It's dirty, it's smelly, it's noisy, it requires a lot of physical labor. I can tell you as somebody who's doing that right now what it entails, and yet we need more of those people. This is an industry in which they got jobs all over the place, but it's not. These jobs are not being filled. It could be an issue of the type of work it is. It could also be an issue of money and time expended or needed to be expended to get those jobs. We need doctors. The medical field is growing. Obviously, the information technology field is growing, but we're talking college educations needed for these fields. And look at how expensive college is with all the student loans that people have. People don't want to go into debt, but they need to in order to get these licenses and training and degrees to get these jobs. So the question that faces people is, what do you do when you don't want to go into debt for something? How do you get it? And unfortunately, the options are fewer and fewer by the year, because it just is getting harder and harder to buy things with a depreciating currency and with an economy that is regulated to the extent that it cannot produce the people that it needs to fill the jobs that are open.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking to Jonathan Bogan. It's always a fascinating conversation. Please buy his book on Amazon.com. All of you watching now and in the future, it's literally only less than $10 for the Kindle version. You can buy the book paperback, less than $20. Support this man. He's very intelligent, as you can see, very articulate, and somebody we need to hear more of. And I want to see him all over the place. And John, I love what you've been doing with your YouTube page. Keep at it. It takes 20 years to be an overnight success. So I want you to keep putting out content, man. You're doing the world a huge, huge favor. Doing this country a huge, huge favor, just having your opinions out there, because these are not opinions you get every day talking to people or even on mainstream media. I mean, it's thank God we have at least platforms now where people like you can get in front of us as Americans and give us a different point of view. I want to thank you for coming on as always, man.
Hey, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I always look forward to them. I always look forward to an opportunity to inspire people to look at the world in a more accurate way and in a way that shows them how they can make their own living situation better.
Yeah, I think, and I mentioned this last time. I know we've been on. The last time you were on, I think, was 5 months ago. If maybe we can do something where it's like a once a month thing where we're just kind of following what the White House is doing. I think that would be really good, particularly for 2020, because this is going to be a game changing election. I know we say that every 4 years in America, but this in particular, I mean, this is really, uh, I can see if Trump wins, then the status quo continues and possibly even gets worse with the money printing. If I'm thinking who else could win? What's his name? This Mr. Not Democrat or Republican, Bernie Sanders. If let's say Bernie Sanders wins, which I think he's going to pull it out. If Bernie Sanders wins, then I have an opinion right now that the Republicans wake up and all of a sudden decide that the deficit's too big and they want to start doing something about it.
What a joke that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'd be a huge joke, but I want to call that out right now. If a Democrat wins, right, the Republicans will all of a sudden wake out of their pretend zombie sleep and start talking about the deficit, because that's what they do. They love to do that when they're not in power. So when they're not in power, that's when all of a sudden, oh my God, spending is out of control. Look at the debt. But here's Trump, basically spending like a Democrat, even worse. And they're not talking about deficits now.
It would be, it's pure politics, and it just makes a joke of our whole system of civics, that these guys will do exactly what the other party does in terms of spending us into unpayable debt, but they, in their minds, are doing it for virtuous reasons, and therefore they don't complain. But the other party does the same thing, and because they are the other party, then they raise a stink about it. But this is what you get from both parties. You get Democrats complaining about Republicans, and Republicans complaining about Democrats. And as I see it, both parties are really one and the same with two different names. So they need to be kicked out. And I'm not under any illusions that it's going to happen in this election, but that is what I'm calling for, is that we kick both parties out. We recognize both parties for who they are and what they are. A true detriment to this country, and they should both be kicked out and replaced with those who identify as libertarians, who actually will not spend this country into unpayable amounts of debt, who will keep our country free and preserve what it means to be the greatest country in history of the world.
Yes, indeed, man. Some people in the chat room saying Trump will win. I don't know. I think Trump is very vulnerable this year. And my guest, Jonathan Bogan, just went over not too long ago the reasons where he is vulnerable this year. And I think there's this, when we look at healthcare, when we look at some of these corporations that have paid zero taxes over his administration these last couple of years, I think there's some vulnerabilities there. Some people looking at their communities, they're seeing homeless people for the first time. They're seeing roads not being repaved. They're seeing a lot of problems that have not been taken care of. Infrastructure in this country falling apart, miserable. We haven't built a new airport in I don't know how long, major airport in I don't know how long. But it seems so easy for us to be able to get football stadiums, which in all intents and purposes are really kind of useless outside of football. But again, that's a whole conversation. My guest, again, has been Jonathan Bogan, author, lecturer of Say No to Big Government, My Case for Maximum Freedom. Please go to his Twitter page. Twitter is by the name of Libertarian Black Man. His YouTube page, Libertarian Black Man. You can put that in the search engine right now at the top, and you can go ahead and subscribe to his YouTube page, and also make sure you press follow on his Twitter page. John, I want to have you back here no more than 3 months from now, because we gotta talk about where this economy is going, where this election is going. Super Tuesday is coming up in March, and that's going to be a real big game changer. It's going to really clear out the field for the Democrats, and we're going to talk about some of the policies, whoever is going to be in the lead there, and how they could affect our government. All right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm always available, and I look forward to more frequent interviews, because this is definitely going to be an exciting year, in that it is an election year with so much on the line, with so much at stake, and so much happening out there, that we should definitely stay on it and keep everyone aware of really how things are going and how they are going to go in the future.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Buy gold, ladies and gentlemen. Somebody in the comments said there'll be a civil war if he's removed. No, it's not going to be a civil war if Trump's removed, but there will be. I suspect that any predominantly black person who lives in a predominantly black neighborhood, be on guard at your voting booth, at your voting poll center. I have no doubt that you may see some criminal white supremacist activity where they might go out and just start attacking random people who are looking to go out and vote and make a difference on election day. So stay tuned for that. But that's a conversation, again, we'll have as the days come closer. John, again, thanks for coming. All of you guys, appreciate you in the chat room who are joining us. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend almost 2 hours with us. Until next time.